The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Success in Practice podcast. Today is a special episode. Today we have Matt Cooper, who's the president of Osteopathy Australia. He's a board member and sits as the chair of that organisation. Matt currently sits on the board of Osteopathy Australia and is its president. So today is a very good episode to kind of understand the ins and outs of that organisation and what it does. Matt also currently owns and operates the Melbourne Osteopathic Clinic out of two locations, Melbourne and Docklands. He was first exposed to osteopathy because of his involvement in football, and when I say football, I mean the AFL version of it, cricket and running, and his passion for this profession has grown from there. He enjoys the challenge of diagnosing and treating, as well as strategising ways to prevent the recurrence of common musculoskeletal complaints. He has a passion for sports, rehabilitation, and working with clients to enhance their individual physical performance, and he uses a variety of hands-on techniques in that aspect. Matt studied osteopathy at Victoria University, graduating in 2011. He's a raging Western Bulldogs fan and was able to be a part of their medical team between 2013 and 16. He spent the better part of his career building the two practices and then rebuilding them after the COVID-19 lockdowns. As I mentioned, he sits on the Board of Osteopathy Australia and is a current chair and president. Matt's a family man. He's partnered by his wife, who also happens to be a GP, and two young children. Matt, welcome to the Success in Practice podcast. I know you host your own podcast called Prac Daddy, so hopefully we've both had enough practice to get this kind of sounding right, looking right, mate.
Yeah, it should be an easy conversation, Sammy. Thanks so much for having me, mate.
Hopefully. So thanks for being here, mate. I guess before I start with some of the things surrounding Osteopathy Australia, I just want to get a bit about you and about your background. I want to get some history and just understand your tertiary education, your experience, your early influences, and a little about your experience in the first years of practice. So tell us about that, mate. Where did it all start for you? How did you get into osteopathy? What were your university years like?
Yep. So I guess my start in osteopathy tended to be around sort of late teen years. So played a lot of sport coming up, very heavily involved, football during the winter and cricket in the off season, and just touch footy as well. So very busy, and then had some significant injuries when I was about 15, 16, mainly with shoulders dislocating, broken bones around the shoulders, collarbones. I fractured my neck in one footballing incident, which wasn't great. Ended up in the Royal Children's Hospital with that. And so was introduced to osteopathy when I was about 16, 17, due to sort of secondary complications to those injuries, a lot of thoracic pain, neck pain, obviously. Shoulders are still pretty dicky, so had some issues there, and got some help with that, and so it's some interest from that. Went through, did year 12, did reasonably well in year 12, and quite naturally, as you would expect, I started a chef's apprenticeship. So finished high school and thought, I'm going to be the next Jamie Oliver. I love cooking. That's going to be great. Realised after about 6 months of doing that not many people in hospitality or working in kitchens were very happy, or very healthy for that matter. I'd actually got a place in at VU by that stage, so I deferred for the year and thought, let's give this chefing a go, and then happened to start out at VU in 2005. So we were the cohort. Our cohort actually got moved out from the city to the St Albans campus. So we were sort of out there by ourselves. which tended to make us a pretty tight little cohort, to be honest. Some of my best mates were still from that cohort that I went through. I don't know if you know much about this history, but we were out there for a year and we campaigned pretty hard to get back to the city to be with the rest of the osteopathic program, which was based out of Flinders Street and Flinders Lane. My second year, we were successful in that, and our second year was back in it at VU in 2006. So went through uni. I took a year off in the middle. So between the bachelor side of things and then the master's program, travelled around for 8 months, went over to Europe and Asia and had a brilliant time, and highly recommend that to any young students or anyone, high school leavers who are wanting to experience the world a little bit while you're young. Go do it. It's certainly a bit harder as you're older and you have children. So that was brilliant. She wasn't my wife then, but my wife and I went around for 8 months and we had a brilliant time. Then came back and finished the masters for 2 years at VU. I moved into private practice pretty much straight away. So once that, I think it's about a 6 to 8 week period to get registered, get your graduation sorted and your master's approved and all that jazz. Started in at a clinic in Brunswick. So Brunswick's in a north suburb of Melbourne. Local clinic called Brunswick Osteopathy and Acupuncture. They had both osteopaths and traditional Chinese medicine practitioners. I had a really great experience there. I did sort of 2.5 days a week. I think, if I remember right, it might have been 3.5 days a week. And I actually kept my other job as well because I kind of moved into a subcontractor role. And I used to work events at that time as well at one of the football stadiums down here in Melbourne. So I was sort of a supervisor, team leader in those roles. So I knew at least if I worked those events, I could pay my rent and eat. And then it allowed me pretty much to, start my osteopathic career at Brunswick Osteopathy. Look, realistically, I had a great start. I certainly remember, my first day I rocked in, I had a handful of patients, and it certainly grew from there. I started, as I said, a couple of days a week, and then I was doing Saturday mornings, and I found being on a Saturday morning got really busy really quick, and I was able to feed that into my other days in the week. And so it meant, look, I'd be guessing, but I reckon about 6 months into it, I was able to actually step out of that other job and do a bit more osteopathy. And I was really comfortable to do that because I was seeing good patient numbers pretty quickly. So this was around 2011. So I was there for a couple of years, and then I moved across to Melbourne Osteopathic Clinic in 2013, and I was sort of doing Brunswick and Melbourne. I sort of split my time between both, and then I just focused on Melbourne. So we did that for a few years, sort of built my book up there and got really comfortable with those guys, and really great working environment. We had quite a big team of osteos, but also podiatrists, exercise physiologists, massage therapists, myotherapists. So it was a really fun clinic to work at. We had a great social team, and we all practiced sort of similarly, and threw around ideas and a lot of professional development there, and it was really good growth for me as a practitioner. Seeing a lot of patients, but then also having like-minded practitioners to bounce off. And so around 2016 I went to those guys and said, look, I want to open my own thing, and I'd be interested in doing it with you. And so we went through a few different things, whether or not I was going to open or buy into the clinic that I was at, or I really sort of wanted to do my own thing, but with the help of these guys, very experienced osteopaths. And so that worked really well. We opened up in Docklands in 2016, which is a sort of satellite suburb to the Melbourne CBD. As the crow flies, our clinics were probably only a kilometre and a half apart from each other. But they're very different demographics. People who work in Docklands don't tend to go into the city and vice versa. And so, we opened up into there in 2016, and that grew rapidly. Within the first 3 years, we had myself, 3 other osteos, and a couple of myotherapists, and it was an incredibly busy practice until March 2020, when the arse fell out of everything. So, I felt very fortunate to that time, and then COVID hit, and I guess everyone in Australia had a very different experience in COVID. But being in city clinics, CBD practices during COVID in the most locked down city in the world, certainly created its challenges. this isn't play the violin stuff, Sammy, by any means or anything like that. But, I remember that first week, 96% of our patients cancelled.
Yeah. We all saw it, mate. So, yeah.
Yeah. It was horrific. And, and so we're still at that stage where we sort of haven't got back to pre-COVID levels, but we've maintained the 2 clinics. We've had a bit of an ownership change in that time. We had 3 owners. We're now back down to myself and one other, working over the 2 clinics, a much smaller team and a much smaller spaces. But we're rebuilding. One thing that's been consistent throughout is sort of my personal patient numbers have always been really relatively consistent, and the practitioners that have stayed with us have been really consistent throughout that. But different challenges which COVID set up through that. Throughout that time, obviously, 12 years, or what are we now, 14 years, 13 years. I got married in that time, had a couple of kids. My daughter's 10 now, my son is 7. So it kept me very occupied. Early in that time, I worked at the Bulldogs, as you said, in the opener there. I was there from 13 to 16, which was juggling that. And 16 was a really busy year, actually. I was working at the Bulldogs. I opened my own clinic, and I also started doing some clinician work at VU. So I really had quite a diverse time in my career in 16. We were young parents. My daughter was, 2 at that stage. And then Paddy, my son, came along at the start of 17. And that's sort of part of the reason why I finished up at the Bulldogs. I just wanted my weekends back. I felt like I wanted to see my kids and be at home a bit more.
It takes its time.
It does. Yeah. And working at a football club, we can talk about that later, but it does occupy a lot of time, and they expect a lot. So, it's a brilliant experience. But yeah, it was a busy time, but it was probably, some of the most enjoyable times of my career, being that busy and working in those various different spaces. And now, I'm no longer at the football club, but I'm doing some voluntary stuff through Osteopathy Australia. Still got my toe in the water at Victoria University, and obviously running 2 clinics. So plenty to keep me busy and fulfilled in this career at the moment.
Plenty there. I'll just bring you back to that COVID comment. I mean, I've always been told that, osteopathy or osteopaths who practice osteopathy are generally recession-proof. Your patients tend to hang around with you because the kind of results that you get are very unique. And we felt like in Sydney here that we were even COVID-proof because business actually. So, mate, the only thing that really stopped you guys from being COVID-proof is that obviously the government decision to lock everybody down,
Yeah.
And so, we almost had that happen here. And I mentioned before, I remember having a chat to my wife, and I said, listen, if I have to, I'll just put the portable table in the car and just drive around and do some treatments and, do that.
I think really early on in the piece, there was a lot of fear seeded into the population. It was very much, and there was a lot of unknowns, is the way I would describe it. People were told to stay at home; they couldn't travel beyond 5 kilometres. Being a CBD clinic, where, to be honest, probably 95% of our clientele are workers in the city.
Yeah.
They just no longer were there.
Yeah.
And it probably took a couple of weeks, particularly like if we go back to mid-March 2020, took a couple of weeks just to calm down a little bit. Everyone was really heightened. People were scared. People didn't know if they could leave the house. They weren't sure what was going on. And so we understood that. But, we were also very, very aware of how important what we were doing is for people's health and well-being. I'll
agree with you there, because I had some colleagues who also ran the Sydney clinic here in Sydney. Although those clinics weren't shut down, they just didn't have any clients because their clients weren't at work. So that was a challenge for them. But, my clinics are suburban clinics, and we probably haven't done any better business than we've done through COVID.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is the injuries you were seeing. And so people would come in and say, I've got plantar fasciitis, so my calves are sore, and my knees are playing up. I'm like, well, what are you doing? You've never had knee pain before. I'm just going out for a walk with the missus. Where are you going?
Everywhere. Yeah.
Where are you going? And they're like, we're just going to the park. How long are you walking for? Oh, about 4 hours.
Yeah. I'm not conditioned for it. Yeah. Look,
Yeah.
and that was very much it. We hand on heart, like job keeper and job keeper saved us. If it wasn't for that, I don't think our clinics would be here. I can honestly say that we just watched our diary dissolve. It was really confronting, and I thought, like, I don't know what a mental breakdown is, but I thought I was very close to having one at that time, like just sitting there watching Clinico, just the colours disappear, one after the other. And I actually had to flip my thinking at that time. I went from a place of being quite resentful to a place of being quite grateful to the people that actually came in for treatment and seeked our help. And what we did, and we decided as a leadership group, is that we actually had to nurture our database. Like, even if they're not coming in, we need to help them and provide the information to cut through the noise a little bit and just give some clarity on some of the things. And I remember we sent out an email early doors because what we knew about COVID at that time was it was a virus, and you want a really robust immune system to deal with the virus. We don't know how severe this virus is going to be, but we know it's a virus. And so we were sending out just some general information, about exercising and eating well. And, what were we finding were people were locking themselves indoors and eating crap and drinking a lot of alcohol, and, their behavior changed quite considerably. And so, we're putting little things out to our database, whether it be some movement-based exercise videos or some stretching videos, or, doing some free telehealth just to engage with people and show that we were still there, but actually show that we still care about their health and well-being. And so from that perspective, that also gave us something to do, which was really, really good mentally from my perspective, because it was bloody challenging, mate. It was a really difficult time. And, I think there's still in Melbourne, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but you notice at the Melbourne town halls, there's some bit of aftershock still going on a little bit from that. People are a bit beat up still.
Definitely.
And, still getting over it to a degree. And, to be honest, as an osteopath, you're feeling that in their bodies, like not just my fellow osteopaths, but, our clients. There's certain things that they're still holding on to. Yeah.
Mate, you gave us a good background there and a backstory about your journey into osteopathy. Tell us about your early influences. Who were some of the people that you looked up to and who really influenced how you practice?
Yeah, look, I had some great teachers through my time at VU. One that really sort of stood out to me was Paul Francis. Paul's an osteopath. I think he now heads up something at Adidas in innovation and things like that.
I studied with Paul.
You studied with Paul?
Yeah, I was in the same cohort.
Yeah,
Paul's actually head of the, I think, a Polish first division soccer team at the moment.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Well, he did some work. I ended up doing some work with Nike, I think, on some branding or something. He just kind of deviated, but went big time in the NFL with Nike and did some stuff there.
Just an incredible mind. But the one thing that he really ingrained in our year level and me was, how much structure affects function. And he very much tied in. He was our biomechanics lecturer for a year, 18 months, but really much tied in that sort of underlying osteopathic principle and brought it back to a biomechanics. And, they were such fun classes. They were practical. There was a lot of, what's a torsion here doing to there? Or what's if a muscle's tight and restricted there, what's that doing here? And putting people into funny positions and maybe taping something a particular way and making us look at the body as a whole to see how, maybe something in the foot or the ankle can affect up through the hip and the low back and then maybe through the shoulder. And, by the end of that, year, I think that was in third year, like it just clicked for me. It made osteopathy make sense. And he didn't just talk about, bones and muscles. He spoke about, the viscera, the nervous system, basically everything that makes us us. Yeah. And so, he was great. We had some older osteopaths with just wealth of experience in Brian Nichols and John Pitcher, who taught through us. We had Jade Harries, who was amazing and just vibrant and energetic and just loved osteopathy and sort of instilled that in us. And then, someone like Gary Fryer, who, just an incredible history and a historian on the profession of osteopathy. Gary went over to Kirksville, I'm pretty sure, while I was still at uni, or it might have been after or just before. And, he just light up when he was talking about still and so many different things. And so, I had a really great time at university. And now, we had a lot of fun as a cohort. We were a small cohort, but we're really close, especially the St Albans crew, as we called ourselves. And then when I sort of dropped back from those guys when I went away for a year, the cohort that I came up through, they were just awesome. And so, we were a great influence on one another, but then just amazing teachers. And, countless clinicians, and it's funny, you still catch up with them. You go to a town hall and, oh, you're my clinician 15 years ago. Or, I was doing a thing for OA on Monday at a clinic in Blackburn, and I was with Sarah Smith, who was one of my clinicians back in the day, and she was, just different in her own way and brilliant as, an influence there. So I could probably list 50 people, who I went through with, and then obviously the guys that I worked with at Brunswick and then Melbourne Osteopathic Clinic as well, significant influences on me from an osteopathic perspective. And then personally, look, realistically, I've been with my wife since I was 18 years of age. She's one of the smartest people I know. She's an incredible brain and an incredible GP with incredible empathy and I would say she's clearly the biggest influence on my life. Like, she's the mother of my children. And, as we went...
She'll be listening to this, I think. And
I think, I don't know. She might roll over a little bit. She never really listened to my Prac Ready podcast, Sammy, but not that she certainly asks a lot of questions. But, yeah, it's... she's been a brilliant influence, and then obviously, your parents and family and friends and all that.
It's a good segue because that's leads me into our next question. You've known your wife since you were 18, and you've got two children. I think a 10-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl. Is that correct?
Other way around.
Other way around.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. 10-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son. Yep.
Tell us about that particular relationship, given that you're an osteopath, she's a GP. How do things what's dinner time like in terms of any professional conversations? And tell us about maybe some insights you might have into the osteo/GP relationship, given that, she gives you some feedback on, I guess, even just, things to do with Osteopathy Australia and how osteopaths are being marketed.
Yeah, look, there's a few different things. Look, Kate, my wife's she's a debriefer. She loves to talk about patients throughout the day, and she'll definitely pick my brain around musculoskeletal things. She works out in Melton, which is where Jade Harries, or Jade Scott now, her clinic, right. Western Region's out there. And so they've got a brilliant relationship with the osteos out there. And, Kate's very happy to refer to osteopaths, obviously being married to one and understanding what we're about. Our conversations, I'm not a huge debriefer on the day, but I'll certainly, if I've got, concerns with a patient or things I'm not worried, or that I'm worried about, I should say, medically, we'll talk about that, which we do try to keep work at work a little bit. I'm very big on that. I try and keep my home life a little bit separate from work where I can. Whereas Kate does like to debrief, so that's fine. But then, from that standpoint, the relationship, I guess, between osteopaths and GPs, I think it's quite unique to the osteopath and their area that they work. I work in Docklands. We have a brilliant relationship with the GPs around the corner from our clinic. It's a relationship that I've spent a fair bit of time harnessing. I've never gone in and put on a platter of food for them or anything like that and present it to them. Yeah. No, but I've certainly, the one thing I always did was ensure that I shop locally. is the way I would put it. I'm in Docklands. Docklands is a community area. One of my clinics, I get my hair cut there, my optometrist there, my dentist is there, my GP's there. So I do everything locally because that's a way of getting myself out.
Yeah.
I make sure, I know it sounds funny, but if I'm going to the GP that day, I make sure I've got my MOC polo on. If I'm going to the dentist, I've got my MOC polo on, because you just never know when those little incidental conversations will start.
Yeah.
I often found the hairdressers were the best referrers.
They are.
But we had amazing, and we still do have amazing relationships with the GPs around the corner. A number of them come in for treatment. And that's the best way you can show what we do, let's be honest, getting them in on the treatment table and showing and explaining what we're doing and how we look at things and how we see things. And, our patients tend to be the biggest advocates. They'll, we cross-refer to them and they will refer to us, and it works really well in that. I think there's obviously, if we talk broadly amongst osteopaths, and some of the things I hear from feedback from members and things like that is, depending on the area, it can be very challenging to get an in with GPs. And some of those things have changed quite a lot. Historically, pharmaceutical companies and that used to turn up and roll out the red carpet and give away a whole heap of stuff, and, GPs got used to that. It's not, I don't know, it's that practical for an osteopath to do that?
No, God, no.
I don't think it is, but I just reckon, you really need to show your brilliance as a practitioner and your unique proposition that you can offer their clients and your clients. Yeah. I think one of the things Kate and I spoke about, Kate did a little bit with the university in regards to some of the clinical education stuff and the GPs. I think there was a little bit of a misalignment with what the universities were teaching and then what GPs sort of want. So if we're talking about, say, referral letters, for example, Sammy, I remember when I was at uni, I don't know if you did this, but we certainly did it where you'd write a page and a half of, what it is, all the tests you've done, what you found, the treatment, your suspected diagnosis, blah, 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 what you ever expect. I remember showing Kate this, because I was marking assignments around this, and she said, there is no bloody way I would read that.
That's right.
No bloody way. I said, what do you mean? And she goes, I'd get to about the first line and go, and I'd scroll and I'd try and find what you want.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting. And so I really take it from a position that GPs are time poor. Yeah. And most busy GPs are very time poor. And so they want to know essentially what it is and what you need. Yeah. And what your concerns are. And the quicker you can do it, the better.
Yeah.
All this nice stuff about, Sammy's this age and he likes playing sport and he's a family man and da-da-da-da-da-da. They just don't have time to read that. So
well, I think also it's like if people want to empathise with GPs, they just have to look at themselves, right? Like you're time poor too. And 100%. So when you receive say a post-surgery, you receive a post-surgery report from a surgeon, it's a paragraph long saying, this is what I did, this is what needs to be done, thank you very much.
Yep.
And it's great. You love those reports because like, I've got some direction now. GPs meant the exactly same thing. That's right. Exactly. Tell them your diagnosis, tell them what you're doing, tell them the prognosis. Thank you for referring the patient. Have a great day. You can take that piece of paper, put it in your folder. So when the patient comes, you pull it out, and the GP looks amazing in front of the patient because they've got this correspondence. It looks like they're working as a team.
Exactly
it's
right.
Care factor, right? And
exactly right.
Yeah, you don't need 2 A4 pages of report writing.
It actually also reflects really well on you as a practitioner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you are concise, that you understand that they are time poor, and that you're doing what's in the best interest for the patient.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's the other thing we forget about GPs. They're small business as well.
Yeah.
So essentially, they're providing a service to a consumer also, and so, they. Time is money in their world also. So, they're very much looking for the best outcomes. And if you can guide that a little bit and help with that builds trust, it builds rapport, and then you get that sort of delay.
Then they'll send you a patient, you do well with them, they'll send you a second, you do well with them, they'll send you 5, and then off you go, right? That relationship might take you 6 months to a year to foster.
Absolutely.
And if you just do the right things consistently, it'll happen. I think people just kind of send one thing off. Oh, this didn't work. They didn't send anyone back to me. Just be a little bit persistent with it.
Go again, follow up with the patient.
Yeah.
Like there's all these things, and I I think keeping the patient close and showing that you genuinely care is never going to be poorly received.
Yeah, definitely.
In my experience.
Definitely. Mate, I want to know about your journey to the Western Bulldogs. Yeah,
Yep.
the medical team and what that experience was like. I'll discuss with you a bit later on about some specifics in that. But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how you got there, what the experience for you was like, and then and what you can tell people about it. Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Yep. So, first things first, Sammy, hand on heart, I am a genuine Bulldogs nuffy, and anyone who knows me knows that
I believe you.
I absolutely love the Bulldogs. And so, it was a little bit of, let's say, right place, right time. So, back in 2013, the Western Bulldogs started their own VFL team, a reserve team, yeah. And so Nick Brasher, I don't know if you know that name, but Nick Brasher was at the Bulldogs as their osteopath, and I knew Brash, and I sort of just sent him a text. I said, hey, I see they're starting a VFL team. What sort of staffing have they got? And he said, look, they've got none. Put your hand up, send an email to this person. So I just got on the front foot, and I did. I think within... it wasn't long. Within a couple of weeks, they sort of got back to me and I did an interview. It was one of those interviews where it wasn't like an interview. It was more telling you what the job was and what you're doing. And so very much working within the medical team, so made up of physiotherapists, had exercise physiologists, sports scientists, had me as an osteo. They had a whole heap of highly skilled trainers who were, whether they be physiotherapist students, osteopathic students, myotherapy students. It was actually really smart how they built their team. They used, they didn't just get old Johnny who used to be at the club for 100 years to come and carry water. They got some young students who were doing hands-on therapies and things like that to help build that team. And so 2013, started working at the club, very much doing pretty much everything they asked. Yeah, I was very new and fresh-faced, and it would essentially be, hey, Matt, player X has got a sore ankle. Can you have a look at it? I think he might have a facet joint sprain in his lower back, his neck, whatever. He can't turn his head to his right. So very much just doing osteopathy in those situations. But then, on game day, it was very much all hands on deck. So, 2014 wasn't a great year for the Bulldogs senior team, but it was a brilliant year for the reserves team. We actually won the premiership in our first year in the competition there. And we had a great time. We had a lot of fun, and Winning does that. You feel really good about yourself and what you're doing. You don't mind the time spent because you're winning a lot of the time. But invariably, a lot of it, especially on game days, it's triage. It's a quick assessment. It's okay. What's going on here? Have they busted that ligament, or is it just they've copped a knock there, or is something, is it a significant hematoma, or are they going to be all right, or have they broken something? So you've got to think very quick on your feet.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to assess things in quite a specific manner, but very accurate, and particularly. What the players are saying, they're hyped up and they're amped up, and they, you don't exactly get your full history. You don't go through your squirt and try and work out everything that's going on in that situation. And so very much sideline focused, and very quick. And what I often term as sort of first aid osteopathy, it might be, they've obviously got an acute facet joint there or something like that. Can I give that a quick manip that's going to help them, to be a bit more comfortable playing this second half? Oh no, that ligament's no good. Let's have an assessor. Oh, no, that doesn't feel great. Maybe we need to sit them. I actually found our knowledge of things like head trauma and neurology really helped, especially early signs and picking up concussion. Now, concussion's everywhere now, and our understanding of concussion and all those things has changed quite dramatically. But in 2013, it wasn't great.
It was emerging.
It was emerging. Exactly. Great word. And so we found that, having that neuroanatomy background, thank you, Della, from VU, she was an amazing neuro teacher, but understanding some of these things really helped us to triage people quite early in that process and go, no, they're not right. There's something. So there was a lot of respect sort of gained through that. The rug was pulled out in 2014 at the Bulldogs. The head coach was sacked, heap of staff went, and Luke Beveridge came in. And 2015 and 16 were quite a different medical team. So I was sort of working in between the VFL and the AFL team and doing osteo treatment, running water taping.
Let me kind of stop you there for a sec.
Yep.
And so when a new head coach comes in, give us some, inside perspective there. Do they kind of clear out medical staff and bring their own people in, or do they just bring in maybe one person they trust, and then that person will look at the medical staff and make some changes? How does it work?
So the head coach didn't remove any of the medical staff. That actually happened. There was a big change of the senior medical staff, and when I say the medical staff, I don't mean the doctors. I mean the head physio. And his team at that time.
What would make a club do that?
Oh, look, to be honest, it would be recurrence of injury is a big one. Personality clash sometimes.
Right. Yep.
And sometimes it's just the feel of a need to change. What sort of happened at the Bulldogs was...
I'm interested in this. Who assesses that? Like, recurrence of injury, and is there other doctors kind of advising on this stuff? There's got to be somebody that's advising either the coach or the board or something like this. Who's doing that?
There's a bit of a hierarchical structure, and so you would have the head of football and the head of operations, which sort of would do all that. And a lot of those decisions were made before we even had a senior coach. So Luke Beveridge actually came on a lot later, and they sort of worked out that. As part of that, Brash moved on. He went to Collingwood. And so the VFL program was quite successful, but a few of the senior VFL people were moved on. The person who took over medical, he sort of brought on some of his people he knew and trusted to help. Sports science changed. There's a lot of people involved at a football club. There would have been, I don't know, I'd be guessing 30 odd people just in the medical side of things. I would have thought at the Bulldogs. And so that changed. And with that, culture changes a little bit. Yeah, it was quite different. We sort of, the rooms were separated a little bit. Treatment was more. I would get players a bit later in the process and not as early as maybe I would like, and things like that were challenged. And so, it was an amazing experience though to be there in 15 and 16, simply because we went from the bottom of the ladder in 14, sacking a coach, to in 2016 winning a premiership. We won the premiership in 2016 at both AFL and VFL level, and so being part of that team, I got these experiences that not people just don't get. I've drunk out of premiership cups. I've worn a medal. I've done these things. I was hugging players, in the rooms and things like that. Which I'll hold that forever. That was just an amazing experience. The things I would say about working in sport, this is very general, and this is my personal opinion. You've got to love it.
Yeah, it's not glamorous. It's not glamorous, is it?
It's not glamorous. You're not going to get paid a lot. Expect to be the first to arrive and the last to leave.
Yeah.
Expect to do things that you don't expect to do. I remember at bloody Coburg spraying out a wheelie bin so it could be used as an ice bath after the game. And, you're in there with a mop trying to clean the bloody thing. And, all these different things that just weren't that pretty. But, it was great to be involved, but you're not doing it for the money. Certainly not doing it for the money, unless you lead up a team and you're the head of high performance or something like that. But me, I was a casual staff member, and the expectation on your time is very high. It's very high. I remember when we spoke, it'd be, you'll be here for training during the week. It might be 4 or 5 hours, and then game day might be 5 hours, and what that usually meant was 8+ on both.
Yeah. Maybe the whole day's gone and you turn up.
Exactly right. Right. I love football. I loved being involved, so it wasn't a problem for me. But, having a second child, or my wife was pregnant with my son when we won the premiership in 2016, I just need to make a judgment call. Do I want to be away all day Sunday, her with 2 kids, and not being there for those moments? I love going to football, so I chose family over that.
You're a better practitioner now than when you were in 2013, 14, 15.
Hugely.
Right.
Hugely.
And so one of the things that I have a conversation with patients about is that, they'll say to me, look, we went and saw the physio for, I don't know, some NRL team here in Sydney. And I'm like, this is what he said. I'm like, well, whatever, that's fine, and then we kind of do the consultation, and I'll say, well, this is a lot different. Excuse me, this is a lot different than what the physio said. And then we'll get into the conversation. My personal experience is that generally the people that are at clubs are not the best people in their field. And let me clarify that. It's generally people who have a passion for that sport, and they're emerging. They're kind of trying to use that experience to improve their own skill set. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But great practitioners are busy with or without the club.
Yeah, I reckon as a general comment, there's certainly, you see that a fair bit. You get a lot of very young practitioners. I was young. I was 3 years out. It was my third year practicing when I started. And you do have a lot of young, whether it be physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, sports scientists. You've got people maybe doing their first year of their PhD. So, I tend to agree with what you're saying. I think I don't want to
take anything away from, I guess, the effort that gets put into it.
Yep.
Right? But the Bulldogs would probably be best served having you on their medical staff now, given your experience. But that won't happen because you're busy now.
No. But when we saw, we'd have players come into the clinic, and, we still get various players come into the clinic, and that's when you can do the real work with them. It's difficult to do it in a club setting.
Yeah.
It might be, hey, can you have a quick look at this 5 minutes before they run out of training? They're all taped up and everything. And I'm like, really? This is challenging. I need to get into that shoulder, and you've got bloody 5 meters of elastoplast on it. It's,
we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that later when I ask some deeper questions on that. But mate, that's some great insight into what must have been a wonderful experience, especially as a fan.
Oh, mate,
and also as a young practitioner. And not only that, I think you'd be one of the few people that probably won a premiership, because what I say to people is that it's not glamorous. Don't think you're going to run out in the field with the team and lift the trophy at the end of the year, but you actually did. So, which is great.
To be honest, and this is why I feel very grateful. The Bulldogs, nearly 100 years old in the VFL AFL competition next year, and that was our second premiership.
Yeah, right.
The one before that was 1954. So
Yeah.
the fact that I was there in that window, I look at it. My mum was born in 55. Sorry, mum, if you listen to this. But she didn't see that premiership, and she saw her first premiership was the same as my first premiership. And that was amazing. But then there was also positives around being involved in the club. I got to go to the after functions. I got to be in these events that people just don't get to go to. Mad Monday, these sorts of things. So anyway, it was a great time.
Good. Mate, I know you discussed the lockdowns earlier in the conversation and how they really impacted you. What I want to ask you is, can you give us maybe some insight and some, I guess, more specific detail in how you were able to bounce back? Like that's, I think, important too.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give us some ideas in terms of were there specific strategies that you kind of sat and discussed with your team members and said, this is how we're going to do it?
Yeah, look, we really ramped up our engagement. I think one of the things that we found during COVID was, particularly early, as I said, our diary just dissolved. But when people had the option, they started coming in a little bit in dribs and drabs, and we were very thankful for the handful of patients that would come in on a day. And what we actually found is we engaged with the locals. Like Docklands has people who live there, and same with the CBD. So the locals would come in a little bit more, which was probably a bit more than we had historically. And so once sort of 20 and 21 finished, 22 was probably a little bit more challenging, if I'm perfectly honest, Sammy, because we had government support in 20 and 21, whether that be through JobKeeper, and there were various grants, and the Victorian state government gave various grants to small business, and they stopped. Yeah, so it was just like, okay, we're back to being a business. And to be honest, it felt like I was starting business again. It felt like, forget from 2012 to 16 or whatever, it was just, we're starting from scratch here. So it was back to doing those 1% fundamentals, engaging with the database, sending out emails, touching base with clients that you hadn't seen for a couple of years. Hey, just how you going? How you've been? We're still here. Little things like that, and really going back to those processes that you could get a little bit complacent with because you were so busy before COVID.
Has that happened again? Do you think that you're getting complacent again? Like as you get busier?
Not yet.
Has that been a lesson that you've learned and it's kind of stuck with you?
It's staying in the moment, yeah, and treating every single patient individually, structuring their treatment plan with them individually, and getting that in the diary, yeah. And I think it's certainly changed that gratitude point. We all have patients where, well, how do I say this? You have patients that you don't like very much, that
definitely
happens in practice. They often happen to be incredibly loyal. Some of them, I don't know how that works, but it does.
It's the clingers that you don't like.
Yeah. But you know what? And that happens. But I found that, I started to like those people because they were so loyal during COVID, and they referred their friends, and I'm like, no, you're actually great. This is good. And so I think I probably matured. It helped me grow up a lot in, it sounds funny because I was roughly 9 years out in practice when COVID hit, fairly experienced, but there's probably not many practitioners in Australia older than me who went through a pandemic like none of us had. Yeah. So it was new for all of us. And so bouncing back's been challenging, Sammy. I think where we certainly downsize the size of our clinics, smaller space, less practitioners. We've found recruiting quite challenging in Melbourne. That sounds really funny, but we'd put up an ad pre-COVID. You get 40 applicants. You put up an ad now, you're lucky to get 1 or 2.
Yeah, right.
And so people, I'm not convinced that people necessarily want to work in the city as much as they used to. I think that's changing though. And the city's bouncing back. The foot traffic's the trains are packed. The footpaths are busy. We're getting busier, and just trying to get practitioners back in the diary and get them busy again. But there were people who I would say were incredibly, they were my regulars before COVID, who I haven't seen since.
Yeah, right.
Reached out, hey, how you going? Yeah, really well. I'm seeing someone closer to home now.
Yeah.
That happened a lot. Yeah. So, new clients became really important again, like really important again for the entire clinic.
Well, that's good, because that humbles you as well, right? Like when you think that, and that's always a good experience, right?
Yeah, massively.
Right. Mate, I want to move on to your round with Osteopathy Australia. Tell me first, give me some background, like how and why did that come about?
Yeah, so basically the end of 2019, they put the ads out for the directorships, and so it was something that I was.
Elections.
Yeah, the elections, exactly right. So the previous president, or the president at that time, was Bill Adamson. Bill was one of my best mates in osteopathy. We studied together out at St Albans, and so I engaged with him a fair bit about OA at that time. I must say I was pretty passive in the OA experience leading up to that. I'd pay my membership, do my CPD, go to the odd seminar, go to the odd conference, meet people, thought, really important for me as a practitioner. But I was a little bit passive. And then sort of 2018, 19, when Bill became president, we talk a lot more about, and he explained all these things that the association's doing. And, I was very much like, got it. He sort of instilled in me that, we need people to put their hand up and, support the association. And I thought, well, I'm in a position now. Business is going really great. Everything's thriving. My team's really happy. Everything's great. I'm going to put my hand up. I was very lucky, I guess, in the sense that when I put my hand up to be elected, I taught at VU for 3-4 years. I taught the 5th year, so I knew all the graduate students there. So I campaigned reasonably hard. I went to them and said, hey, I'm putting my hand up, please vote for me, da-da-da. And so I was lucky enough to be elected. In 2019, or at the end of 2019, my term started January 1st, 2020. My first meeting was when the world imploded in March 2020.
And how long did each term go for? So, sorry, before I let you answer that question, I might kind of stop you as you talk, because you obviously know a lot about it and you're very kind of passionate about it. And people don't know the information that you know. So when there's a point there, so just like this question, how long does a term go for each director?
So terms are 3 years long, and then the max within the Osteopathy Australia Constitution is a max of 2 terms. So yes, it can be. Yeah. So you can essentially be on the board for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
What we had to change a little bit within the Constitution was around having a vice president. So what I noticed when I came on board was that it was very incumbent on the sitting chair and the president to do a lot of the work, and in particular with, obviously with the board, but also with the operation meeting with the CEO, performance reviews, these sorts of things. And it sort of seemed really obvious to me that if that president got crook or, had needed some time off, like what happens? And I just asked a question one meeting, and they said, well, someone else would just have to step up. And so there wasn't an obvious natural succession. And so I sort of came to the board and said, look, I really think we need a 2IC, essentially, a vice president and deputy chairperson, whatever you want to call it. And the board agreed, but we had to take that was a constitutional change because it wasn't within the constitution of the organisation. And so after 2 years, we took that to the AGM. That got voted in, and then we had a process where...
tell us about that. So to change the constitution, what has to happen specifically?
So what has to happen is it has to actually go to the membership in writing before the AGM, and then it needs to be voted yay or nay, essentially, at the AGM.
And is there a specific pass mark on that? by the membership? Is it
Majority,
just
yeah.
majority?
So majority, but essentially, what I don't know if you've ever been to one of our AGMs, Sammy. They're universally poorly attended. So we need to get to what's called a quorum, which is essentially a number of members who can vote via absentee, which is essentially, they will. There might be 2 or 3 items, which is, accept the previous minutes, the financial reports as true and accurate, and then it might be this constitutional change, let's just say, and they might say yes, 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 Sammy, sign, send it off to the CEO, and then that means you agree with those processes, and that will get voted up.
And what's the required quorum? Like, what do you need to have actually? Is there a number? Is there a specific number?
Yeah,
for that?
there is a specific number. I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's not as big as you think it
No,
needs to be.
yeah,
I think it's 20 odd or something like
yeah.
that. I'd have to check. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, but most of the time we'll have the board in the AGM and maybe half a dozen people if we're being generous.
Right.
Even during COVID, we had a virtual AGM, which that there was some legality things we had to check around that. So they're meant to be in person and things like that. Obviously, a pandemic was a little bit different. And even that wasn't hugely attended. The AGM this year will be at our national conference in October.
Yep.
So if you're there, it'll be interesting to see who attends because, even that most people go off. And I remember when I went to one of the conferences up in Noosa, most people were more keen to go for a beer than listen to the AGM. So, but yeah, it's an important governance step, that every organisation like ours needs to go through.
Right. So you then became vice chair, vice president.
Yeah, so vice president last year.
Yep, and I think
the first vice president of the association's ever had.
And Michelle Funder was the sitting president at the time.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, yep. And now I think she ended her term.
So she'd done her 2 terms.
Yep.
And so she finished her term at the end of last year.
Yep.
And then I stepped into the presidency.
So do you step into that role being the vice, or do you have to get voted into that role?
I can still get challenged on that.
Right. By a sitting board member.
Yes, correct.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So someone else on the board said, no, I want to be president. But at that time, no, that didn't happen. It was very the board was happy for me to step into the presidency role. What happened in the year that it was almost like I forecast it, but what happened in 2023 is Michelle had her second child. So she had some time off. So it actually allowed me to step into the role, chair a couple of meetings. So I got some on-the-job experience, if you will, during that time. And then she came on and finished her term. And then, so I've stepped into the role. And to me, it's been relatively seamless. Like before, I certainly know when Bill finished up and Michelle stepped into the presidency role, it didn't seem like there was a huge amount of handover beyond Michelle being a board member.
Right.
The chair does much more than a standard board member. And so I went in with eyes wide open because Michelle had, she'd brought me into various meetings. She'd taken me through things. She'd let me chair meetings and things like that, which helped my development, but then also helped that transition from president to president. And I think this is a really good process for the association to be far more seamless. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess let me then ask you, what are the specific? There's probably there's probably a large role there, but can you detail some of the essential roles of the president in terms of what they do, and also what kind of power do they have within the board?
Yep. So the president chairs the board essentially. So they're the one who will chair the meetings. I work in with the CEO. So Anthony is the CEO. Anthony Nichols is the CEO at the moment. I work with Anthony in terms of looking at the strategy for the association, not the operational side of things, but the strategy for the association. And that's a discussion we have at board level. There's various different arms, different committees off off the board. So there'd be the financial committee, there is the education committee, there's the R&C, which is the remunerations committee. It's a few different governance structures, and it's a little bit difficult to visualize, I guess, but these are important steps in governance. So, for example, as the chair of the board, I understand the financials, but I don't sit on the financial committee. Okay, that's separate to me. One of the other board of directors chairs that, and they bring sort of the finances and understanding that to the board. I suppose probably the easiest way to explain it is what my week looks like, Sammy. So, I'll meet with Anthony once a week, and we will talk about whether it's strategic things that we're working on, some operational sides of things. There's various times of the year where we look at performance review for the CEO and for the team. Might be org structure within the association and how that's working, how Anthony's seeing that. Being a sounding board for Anthony on different things around, whether it be how the team's going, how the board's going, what we're looking at in the future, what's been. There's a lot of things that come up here and there, and there's a lot of things that are obviously happening at a time. And then there's various other things, and there's committees that I sit on as part of the chair, as part of my chair role, I should say, which are the primary strategic focuses of the organisation. So, for example, the new course committee, which is one of our real strong strategic focuses at the moment, have a pretty strong role in that. Michelle really started that sort of process 3 years ago as the previous president, and so it's really important that the president's there. But then also being the figurehead for the organisation, so it's doing things like this. It's what day are we today? We're Tuesday. So yesterday I was meeting with the shadow minister for the NDIS to help advocate for some of the things that we're struggling to get traction within in the NDIS through the incumbent government, federal government. He was quite receptive there. On Sunday I'm going to RMIT's open day to meet with the SOMA reps there and engage with the students.
All right.
Yep.
I'll discuss that a bit more with you in terms of students and so forth. I guess before I get into some specific questions and I guess concerns with Osteopathy Australia, there are some board members that are not osteopaths, non-osteopathic board members, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So we have...
And how are they chosen? Who appoints them? And what is their role? And what is their power within the board?
Yep. So their role is very much to be an external director to the board. So
I know that this is a common practice in organisations, right?
Yes. Yeah. So our external directors are fantastic. We have 3 at the moment. There's a selection criteria. So we go out. There are certain easiest way to describe it's like seek for board members. Yeah, you put an ad out saying, look, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We're looking for voluntary board members to put their hand up and come sit on our board. And then it's the job of the R&C, which is chaired by me, the chair, and a couple of other board members to interview these people to come on. They have a little bit differing periods of time. So some will do 2, some will do 3 years, up to a 6-year period. And once again, two sort of terms in that. A lot of the time, an external board member won't stay on as long as, for example, as an osteopathic director, but they might be on for 3 years. From my perspective and my understanding is that's a relatively new thing for the association, I think, in the last probably 10 to 12 years. Whereas before it was just osteopaths. Having the external directors gives a different lens on things, and we can pick and choose through our selection criteria, I guess, on some gaps that we see in the board. Yeah, so that might be financial understanding. It might be understanding how the university system work. It might be understanding how governments work, or funding schemes, or whatever. There's a whole heap of different things.
And I'm assuming that the decision of who gets on the board in terms of a non-osteopathic board member, that comes back to the
To the board.
To the board, to the osteopathic board members, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, correct. So, we would say, look, we've interviewed these three people. It is the recommendation of the RNC, the Remunerations Committee, to that this person comes on.
Are they voting board members? Do they have voting rights?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They do. And so we've got three externals. We've actually got a fourth external who is a young career osteopath, which is an external director. They're not an osteopath. Even though they're an osteopath, this is a little bit messy, but they're an external director. And because what we find is young osteopaths won't often put their hand up for a board position. And when they did, it was hard to get someone in, but we really wanted that young career perspective. And so this was a way that we could do it through the constitution of the organisation to get an external director who is a young career. So they have to be within their first 5 years of their osteopathic career.
Right.
So their term actually times out much sooner because, they might be a third-year practitioner who comes onto the board, and then they've only got 2 more years until they're sort of a fifth. They've been out for 5 years, and then we'll have to change that over. So that's been a pretty unique. That's probably a year in now-ish, I would say, around this time of year where Julia came on. And that's a completely different perspective for someone who's just starting in their career, and it's been really great from a board perspective to have that voice on the board.
Well, then let me, I guess, go into the regarding the board.
Yep.
And the first question is probably around the election of board members.
Yep.
At the moment, the election of the board members is run by the CEO through, I think, the SurveyMonkey
it's an offsite platform.
And so we have a process within the organisation where the person whose role is, appointed by the board, running the elections that would, I guess, bring on board members that would, appoint his role. I don't see that really as being, that's not I can see where, and again, I'm not placing any kind of, accusation or anything like that, but I think to protect the board, to protect the profession, the professional association, some would argue that anyone that's employed by the board should not be responsible for running elections. What is your view on that? And has that been discussed amongst the board? And would things change in the future?
It was it was certainly discussed at the end of last year when you broached it. I don't think it was a process that was thought beyond, because I don't know if you know how SurveyMonkey works, but essentially it's anonymous until the results get published at the close-off time frame. To do it externally would cost a fair bit of money, I'd imagine. I don't know how much. I wouldn't be sure, but SurveyMonkey was a secure and confidential way of doing it. Members can log in, identify themselves, so identify their name, their membership number, etc., and then vote once, and then it essentially locks them out of it. So security-wise, I think it's fit for need. It's okay, but if the membership felt that it wasn't, I would have thought we would have heard more about that throughout the year. I certainly remember at the time we heard a little bit from yourself and a couple of others. It certainly didn't come up at the town halls at all. I
don't think it would, because it's away from that time now. People have moved on. I guess the question then moves on to that: should the board be responsible for running the election? Rather than having an employee of the association run the election, should somebody from the board or a committee? You have a committee that appoints external board members. Is there any credence to the argument where that particular committee could run the actual board election? It's not even a particularly complicated platform to use, given the fact that you're all highly competent osteopaths and probably use much more complicated platforms in your own practices.
Yeah, and look, whether or not you feel like it needs to be external, I don't think it would probably even be. It's an interesting one to say, oh, should the board do it? Because, I think you could probably make the same argument you're making around board members
Yeah.
doing it
Or
as
someone
the
who's not for election.
Yeah, like
Somebody who's
maybe
not
someone
for election. Yeah.
external. Yeah. I think it's an operational process, and so the board doesn't get involved in operational processes. We're very much away from that. It's more the strategic focus of the organisation, and so my opinion of that is the way it operates. Okay, isn't perfect, but it's the results haven't really been questioned to the extent that they were at the end of last year, any other time. Like talking to it generally, like we got a percentage of the vote, and then after that you get the raw data to see what it is. But we've had people who have asked for that to be kept private. We've had people for asked for that to be public.
The feedback that I got in terms of why it's public or why it's private is just not to hurt anyone's feelings.
Yeah, well, that's part of it.
That was the main feedback that I received, and I guess.
I'm pretty sure we released it as a percentage. I'm just trying to remember.
It ended up being released because of, obviously we persisted. But I guess the fear out there is that we don't want to have either board members or employees who may stack the board and then ensure that things kind of keep going the way they are. There might be different feelings between, I guess, Victorian members and New South Wales members. And a lot of the feedback that I get, like I said to you earlier, when we first started, is that running a podcast like this, you get people, DMing you, saying to you, hey, just privately, this is what's happened, da 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 da.
Yep.
Right. And I guess I'm going to ask these questions because we feel like that there's kind of like it's just business as usual. But again, it may not be business as usual. But having that transparency there just adds another layer of trust, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that feedback's there. Look, there's no conspiracy around it. It's the process that it has always been followed.
Yeah.
And then at the end of last year was the first time it's got called out. So we certainly heard that feedback.
Yeah.
And do we look at tightening it up and doing it a different way? Is there an external? Is it something that the members would want us to spend? Look, I don't know the price point. It might be $5,000, might be $10,000. Or is that better spent?
It really costs more. Like if you kept using SurveyMonkey, but you had at least maybe instead of one person or two people or three people overlooking the whole process.
Yep.
That could just add layers to.
Well, and the one thing I would say is, I would love to see a far higher vote turnout for all.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so that sort of engagement point around that, do we want to? And that's it. I think I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was somewhere between 150 and 200 people voted in the last election out of the membership. Do we want to have that big spend on when the members aren't engaged in that?
Yeah.
When the members really should be engaged in that. It's the people who are representing them, and representing the association. So,
well, okay. I guess the last question I'll ask you about this, and we'll move on to another question, is that if there was a way where you didn't have to spend more money or significantly more money, if it's over a couple of $100, I'm sure it's not a problem. But if there was a way without you having to spend significantly large sums of money, is the board open, especially you as being the president, is the board open to reviewing the process and making sure that there's a level of transparency that makes it very hard to argue with?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I guess moving on. Yep. One thing I do want to congratulate you on, I guess, is the course out at WA.
Thank you.
And I've been quite vocal in saying, well, we didn't hear anything,
Yep.
and we heard something.
Yes.
And I guess, that then begs a question from us over here in New South Wales is that what haven't what haven't we heard in the past that may have not worked out? Because I think for me, and I speak for a couple of other people that have messaged me as well, we need to know about the failures as well as successes, so that when it does come to elections, we can make decisions and kind of make decisions based on the information. And so, to finish my point, great outcome in WA. I think that's fantastic. And I guess from what you've said, that yourself and Michelle and whoever's part of that education committee was kind of heavily involved in liaising with the university there and doing a great job. So thank you for that.
Look, I went through, just to talk to that. Sorry, Sammy. I did go through during the town halls. We spoke about the process that required to get to that point.
Yeah.
And it is quite a long process, and each state is quite different. And as you're probably acutely aware, universities are pretty big business now. And so it was very much building a business case in every state and territory in Australia, except for Victoria. We obviously felt we didn't need more courses in Victoria. And then, so going through that process took time. And from my understanding, essentially, is that the ECU project and that coming on board, from go to well, it was roughly 2019 we started this process to 2024, them announcing that they were going to have a course. That was allegedly light speed. That just doesn't happen in that university space. We've got, some of our external directors, Kathy Rashorgi, who's, really high up in the University of Sydney. Like, she just couldn't believe that it happened that quickly. So there's two sides to it. It's our engagement and our advocacy point of going to different universities, looking and targeting universities with the specific sort of health science focus, and then taking the business case to them and saying, look, have a look at osteopathy. We've done all this work. We can show you how it's going to be viable in this state, student numbers, warts and all, what osteopathy looks like for you as a university. And then, trying to get a conversation, talking to the right people. I know you talked about successes and failures. So obviously ECU is a significant success. How this process, and what I'm finding out in this process as
Did you find that ECU had an appetite for a course?
Yeah, and we had a couple of champions over there who were in the right spot, deans, etc., associate professor level, who were looking at developing not only a health workforce in Western Australia, but they wanted to be at the forefront of that, and they saw osteopathy as an important part of that.
Would it be correct then? Sorry to cut you off, but would it be correct then to say that if you can find a university that has an appetite and that they're willing to look at osteopathy, then the process becomes a lot easier and much faster? Would that be a correct statement?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of funny. You sort of go from conversations which seem quite, I always describe it as it seemed quite lukewarm, in the sense that, you would get a sort of a general conversation. Oh, what are you doing? Explain osteopathy to us, and ECU went from lukewarm to hot very quickly. Some go from lukewarm to cold and we just don't hear from them. Others, you have to remind. Others will sort of fluctuate in and out, and those conversations are ongoing. What I would say is we've now got a really structured approach behind it, where we know, the specifics to each state. We know the universities that we need to target, and we're having those conversations at the time. So it's a difficult one to say, like, we should be talking about our failures, because at the moment we haven't had anyone just say a flat out no. It's more like, oh, look, we're willing to continue. It mightn't be right now, but let's maybe look at that in a couple of years, or let's look at that next year.
The concern is, Matt, is that I think the communication was in the past is that there have been flat out no's. Right? In New South Wales, there have been times where, I guess the feedback that was always given to us is that the stench of the University of Western Sydney program has been around, and that's no one's looking at us, right? And that excuse was pretty much given to us by the CEO for probably the last 15 years.
I
Now,
think there's been a little bit of that from some universities.
yeah, and a lot of that I agree with, because
But we don't.
I was around at the time when that
Mm,
course finished,
yep.
and it stunk, and I get it, but it's, that's been almost 12, 13 years since that course closed down, and
Look, and I agree that we have to move on from that. Like,
we can't have that mindset.
no, we can't have that mindset. We can't let that filter into our mindset. We very much need to talk to universities, and like Sydney's the obvious one. It's the biggest population in Australia.
Yep.
There's the second highest amount of osteopaths in Sydney compared to Victoria. And it's something where we are having preliminary conversations with universities. We also have universities that that we currently teach into, like VU and SCU, that have campuses in Sydney. So there's some conversation points around that. Those conversations are confidential, and that's the thing. Like, we want to tell you a bit, and we want to let you know what we can know, and be as open as we can about those things. But there's certain things that we can't at that time just yet, because what we've found is often, occasionally places will go cold when other voices, other people get involved. How do I put that? I don't know.
Yep.
Like, it's very much.
So what you're saying? Sorry.
We're trying to take a really business focus towards this, really structured focus. Michelle, Brett Vaughan, Brett Vaughan's been incredible in this process for us. And it's very much talking the university business language, which is different to a business sort of language, and trying to have the right conversations with the right people, and not being brave in that, but also being really open to having conversations with the universities that are suitable for an osteopathic program, to which we think there are many.
Right. Okay. So I guess what you're saying is you can't give much detail in terms of who you're talking to and what you're talking to. How does the board assess performance then, given that, do we just play a rating game? Like, you as a board, how do you assess performance in terms of, we talk about KPIs all the time, but, like, where does it's a grey area. What you described is a very grey area.
It is, yeah. And it's part of the performance review, but it's not the full performance. Obviously, there's there's many facets to the organisation, and that's just part of it. The fact that we've got our first new course in a decade, I think it is. It might even be more. Is significant.
Yep.
So it's trending in the right direction. But we're not resting on our laurels there, Sammy. We want far more courses in Australia. We want every capital city to have an osteopathic course. We'd love to have multiple in the bigger cities. And so, it's, as I said, that's a fluid process, and there's parts within that. We do a very, very much a 360 feedback thing, but the board's pretty strong in what they expect from the, not just the CEO, but the team at Osteopathy Australia. And so, Anthony's the lead of that team. And so, as I said, we meet every week and we talk about these things.
Yeah.
And so, and then we go back to the membership. I think overwhelmingly what we found around the country is people were incredibly excited about the ECU announcement. There was a little bit of, why not us? And I understand that. It'd be great to be able to announce a course in every state.
Mate, look, it's not about you don't want to build your own building at the expense of someone else's. You want to just keep building buildings everywhere, right? Like that's the idea, right? So it's not just what about us. It's, I guess, look, to put it quite bluntly, we've really suffered here because we're looking at what's going on in Melbourne and Victoria, and we just see this explosion. You're seeing people going to occupational health and safety, aged care, sports organisations, and I'm not sure if the association is acutely aware of this. A large part of that has to do with volume. The majority of that has to do with volume. The fact that even in Melbourne and Victoria, they're talking about different business models, employment, contractor, rental, we're not having that conversation here because we just don't have volume. It's not because we're there's business people in Victoria and there's not great people here. So it's literally has to do with volume. The more students you're putting out there, the more exposure that you're getting to the public, and that's how the profession grows. It grows from the ground up.
And what you're saying is certainly how the government see it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we really need it. We really
Yes.
need a course in the largest market in Sydney,
Australia.
in Australia. So, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, are we seeing all hands on deck? Is this I guess I don't want to say the singular focus, but is it a focus are we desperate? Like,
It's our biggest
have that desperation? Do we have that? And I guess that's not what we're seeing in New South Wales, because maybe the communication isn't there, or maybe the feeling isn't there of kind of like let's light a fire under someone's butt,
It's an incredibly large strategic focus of the organisation, and it's not, as I keep saying, Sammy, it's not just New South Wales. There are other jurisdictions in Australia which we're looking at as well.
Yep.
And like, I can assure you that, it's a massive strategic focus on what we're looking at. Basically, when I came onto the board, it was all hands on deck around, we want a new course. We have to get this process right so we can go to universities and we can, blow their socks off with all the information that they need to get a new course up. Yeah. Now, obviously, then COVID happened, so that was a little bit different, but got delayed. But we still worked on that in the background. Yeah. University was a little bit different there. They were tightening their purse strings and things were happening, but they're opening back up now. And there's going to be a big focus on health. Yeah. I think we need to know that. And so we need to ride this momentum from the ECU course, and we are doing that. We're still meeting with other universities at the moment, and we need a real positive output from our communities in all states, New South Wales and Sydney included, to try and get this outcome. One thing that we certainly found in Western Australia is that ECU were really enthusiastic about the Western Australian osteopathic community and how engaged they are. And so those sorts of things, like if people ask what we can do, it's like, be really positive about osteopathy. And, I've been listening to as I said, some of your podcasts with the other guys that you've got from up there, and, they seem really passionate about osteopathy, and that's awesome. Yeah. And what we need to project is that positivity and that need, and I think, we're going into the weeds here, but talking broadly, if we talk about some of these fields that, will cease to exist in the near future due to AI and things like that. We're in a unique space because we're hands-on, we're personable, we're a profession that will be needed. Yeah, right. People will need us, and we need to be able to show that to different universities.
All right. Let me move on to another question. There's been some, I guess, criticism of the marketing of osteopathy to the public, in terms of what is osteo, and also in terms of, what osteopaths do as being purely musculoskeletal. And I guess I'm going to ask you this question. Are there osteopaths down there at Osteopathy Australia who are filtering some of the content that gets put out by Osteopathy Australia? And if there aren't, why aren't there?
There's a content committee. They're separate to the board. They're an operational committee. And so they talk about that. I think two of them are from New South Wales, I think. Look, the marketing and the engagement, the communication space is a constant, isn't it, really? Like, you have to be on it all the time. It's one thing that I've certainly tried as president, is to engage more in sort of what I'm doing day to day, so members can actually see what we do on their behalf. There's limits in certain things. Obviously, big marketing campaigns cost a lot of money.
Let me focus my question a little bit more. So so there's a feeling out there that the regulator is really attempting to make these allied health professions kind of look the same, right?
The one.
Yeah, osteopaths, chiropractors, physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, and that the way they regulate is really leaning to, and the way they accredit courses as well, is really pushing all those professions to kind of look as to be kind of similar in terms of what they do. And so the criticism comes from the fact that we want to try and have a a unique position in that landscape, and that Osteopathy Australia, the association that's supposed to represent us as professionals, is not going that way. He's just kind of going with the tide, that they're not presenting a unique point of difference about what we do as osteopaths versus what chiropractors do, physios do, exercise physiologists do. And so can you speak to that?
Hello everyone, just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So, the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes, so for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy, and back to the show.
So there's a few things to unpack there. The first thing I would say is that the regulator being AHPRA and the OBA. So the OBA are a board made up of osteopaths, who have a great understanding of osteopathy. So there's different things within government that we don't necessarily have control over, but we can advocate for. From our standpoint, marketing osteopathy is very much a consumer-focused exercise. And what I mean by that is we market to consumers so they understand what osteopathy is and the benefits that osteopathy can provide to them. Okay, we don't need to market to osteopaths because they know what osteopathy is.
Understandable. The question was more aimed at, is there a unique point of difference that's being marketed to the public in terms of what we do?
Yes, and it's very much, you would have seen the program that we had last year and the campaign that we had last year around Shake Your Pain Shadow. That was very using, outsourcing marketing to different firms to get an understanding on what the consumer understood about osteopathy, and then how we can to get them to engage with osteopaths. So essentially, we saw it wasn't just a huge number of people who didn't know what osteopathy was, but there was a huge misunderstanding about what osteopathy was. What we know is the people who see osteopaths love osteopaths. They're big advocates for osteopaths. There is a whole subset of the Australian population who have no idea what we do. And so trying to market to that group has a different challenge to it altogether. It's trying to get that hook so they can get a basic understanding and essentially get them on your treatment table so you can show them and explain to them what they do.
Well, was that seen as a successful marketing strategy, the Shake Your Pain Shadow, I think it was? Was that reviewed by the board? Was that seen as something that was...
It was reviewed by the board. It was seen as a fairly good marketing campaign. It's hard to know whole numbers because we're very much doing it on behalf of the profession. So if someone sees that and goes and sees an osteo in Toowoomba or sees an osteo in Fremantle, we don't get that data. But the engagement with it was quite high through the socials, through the consumer channels. So that was really good. We try and provide different tools for different members to be able to market themselves. There's some brilliant osteopaths doing their own marketing, which is fantastic, and they're engaging with things that are probably doing, maybe even better than some of the things the association's doing, which is awesome.
I think we should look to those people. I think that's a good place to start.
And look, and as I said, we put the call out, and you may have seen this. We put the call out for that group not that long ago, and we had 2 people put their hand up.
Well,
and it was funny. The most engagement, Sammy, and I know you probably saw this, but there was a post. I think it was about posture. I think I saw this, and there was a huge engagement about it. And when once again, that went through that committee. The board didn't have anything to do with that. There was an operational committee, but it went out, and there was engagement around it from osteopaths saying that this doesn't ring true to osteopathy. And I'm like, okay, I understand that point of view. But there was no consumer focus because that's a consumer focused push. Yeah. So we're trying to get people into you as an osteopath so you can marvel and, they can see what you do.
So if I was to get those people on that committee onto this podcast, they would agree that they approve that particular post?
I'd hope so.
Okay.
I don't know. That stuff doesn't come up to the board, mate.
Right.
So, I don't get a sheet of all the marketing campaigns that they're going to do. We very much we have.
I understand the delegation aspect of it. That's going to happen. I totally get that. Right. Okay. So I guess then, with that being said, what is the actual purpose of Osteopathy Australia in terms of what is it trying to achieve for the profession? So one of the things that I've been getting feedback is that, especially around education. So you said earlier that one of the things that you've got to do later on this particular week is go out to RMIT and engage with some of the SOMA members there.
Yep.
And I remember being part of SOMA, and that was a fantastic experience. So it's always a good thing. Current education models at the moment aren't being really appreciated by, I guess, osteopaths who have been probably in the business for longer than 10 years in terms of the actual graduates that they're producing. Now, before I ask you a question around that, I want to go back to the COVID cohort that you mentioned earlier and how much of a hard time they had. And I really feel for them. Has anything been done specifically through the profession to help those particular students that graduated in that time to maybe get them caught up? I think that's a very valid question. Has anything been discussed at a board level and saying, hey, through their own or through obviously not their own fault, this cohort didn't get osteopathy. They just didn't get it in the way that the university wanted to give it to them. They didn't get it in the way that we as a profession wanted them to have it. Can we do something to help them? A course, something to kind of elevate them and maybe get that paid for by the association?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that we did there, but just to talk generally about that cohort, and some will know, some won't know, but the two universities in Melbourne, a lot of their learning went online. A lot of their clinical experience was in a simulated environment. So they're really not putting hands on patients. So they're learning a general, how would I describe it? Like a textbook understanding of how you would treat something without actually doing it. Yeah.
That's tough.
And so it really bloody tough. Yeah. And from the university's perspective, it's like, how do we get this cohort through? The pandemic was no one's fault at the university. It's not the students' fault. But how do we ensure that they are rolling through? So the 2020, it's essentially the 2020 cohort, weren't at university essentially beyond some final assessments and things like that. And then 21 was very similar. Yeah. So that's 2 years of graduates that just didn't have that clinical experience. If you were in fourth year in 2020, your 2020 and your 2021 were not in the student clinic.
Yeah, right.
You didn't get that. So they really needed, some guidance through that, and whether that transition into practice was really important. What we saw as an association was a need to help with our mentor training programs that we provided to our members. So that was trying to upskill business owners and people to help. Not everyone's a natural mentor, and not everyone is great at it, but trying to upskill them to help with their their new staff members as they come into the clinic and ensure that they are in the best position to, whether it be provide feedback or, help teach technique and help deep understanding of osteopathic principles and these sorts of things. And, we spent a fair bit of time targeting and getting that right because we wanted our clinics to be, to a really high standard of looking after new graduates, because we saw that this is going to be a problem. Yeah, it was obviously going to be a problem. Students were doing simulated cases online with a clinician, much like if I was doing it with you right now, I was talking to them over Zoom. And so that was incredibly challenging for them. And so, what we're seeing and some of the trends we're seeing is that, people want a lot of CPD and they want quality CPD. We're not seeing huge amounts of attendance of CPD. Webinars are usually attended when people want to watch them, which is fine. They may not be attended on the night that they're recorded, but they may be attended when, people have a chance to watch it. But once they're in the profession, there's certain limited things that we can do. We can certainly offer seminars and, the conference is back this year, as I said, and different webinars to help people in their practice. But we are relying on leaders within the profession to also help mentor these kids, essentially these junior osteopaths, to ensure that they're, solid practitioners. And I'd certainly heard.
Yeah. One of the things that, just an idea out of a little COVID conference, only available to students who graduated from those COVID years. And that could be something that could be paid for by the membership. That could be something that can be paid for, have them go there for free, get 15 practitioners with over 20 years of experience, get them into get them doing their technique, get them doing their, and it's like just have something there for them to kind of prop them up and give them a bit of passion, because a lot of them are just leaving the profession.
And this is the one thing that we saw in WA. WA certainly did that. They structured a program amongst the clinics over there where they were doing monthly CPD nights. Sammy's clinic, you're going to do this night. You talk about whatever you want to, but let us know what it is. And that clinic would put on some pizzas, and a lot of the junior osteopaths would come around, and then the next month they'd go somewhere else. And what we found, especially in those younger ones, is this want and desire for community, especially if they were moving interstate. Like that rung true a lot. Funnily enough, it actually rang true a lot in Melbourne as well, which was quite staggering, to be honest, that, that lack of community engagement within clinics was really noticeable. And so I think there's certainly things that the association can do, but there's certainly things practices can do together in order to get people.
I guess that's what an association is, Matt. Like an association is an association of practitioners, right?
It is, absolutely. It's a community.
Yeah, so we're kind of looking to the association for leadership on that. And look, I've just had some messages come through from new grads or younger graduates, and they've kind of mentioned the same thing, is that, hey, we graduated, we felt like we were just left out in the dark. We still feel like we're trying to feel our way around. Can you ask Matt if there's something that can be done, something that can be put together so that we could at least get some of the passion that we've been listening to on the podcast.
Yep. Yeah, look, and I think that's something where we need, it needs to be two ways. We need to, we need to engage, but we need them to engage back with the association.
Yeah, I think if you put something out there, mate, I think people will engage, especially if it's free of charge. I think it should be free of charge, just because I think we owe it to the future of the profession to make sure that osteopathy is given to people who have paid for osteopathy.
Yep.
Anyway, I'll leave that with you, and maybe we can bring that up at the next board meeting. One more question. I know we've been doing this for a while, but it's a question around education.
Kind of break records here for you, Sammy, I think.
Mate, yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Maybe we'll do round two.
We might have to. Yep, go for it.
I guess around education, and what I mentioned earlier is that education has really changed, and the kind of graduate we're seeing now is a lot different than the kind of graduate that you were and that I was. And there's a feeling amongst people who have been osteopaths for more than, say, 10 years, is that the quality of osteopathy, I'm not talking about health science, I'm talking about osteopathy, is not coming through throughout these university courses that we have at the moment. Now, I understand that accreditation plays a big part in this. I understand that there's a massive challenge here for Osteopathy Australia, because you really have no influence on what gets taught at the university, other than a conversation you might have, with. But has this been recognised at a professional level in terms of an association? And is there pushback? Are we seeing this? Are you guys getting to a board meeting and saying, hey, we're not happy with the quality of osteopathy that we're getting in terms of its courses? What can we do about it? And when we go to RMIT, when we go to Victoria University, what are we saying to them? Are we just patting them on the back and saying, hey, great job, go out there and do it? Or are we actually saying, look, we're going to support you, but we're not actually happy with what you're receiving in terms of osteopathy?
We meet the association. So myself, chair, I chair the think tank, which is all the universities. So RMIT, VU, SCU, APRA, AOC are represented, and then Osteopathy Australia are there. And we get in the room 4 times a year, and we talk about these things. And this has been broached, Sammy. It has been broached because the members have brought this up. I'd certainly know at the Melbourne Town Hall, Gary Fryer, who was the head of the VU course, was in the room listening to exactly what you've just said.
Right.
Yeah, members were saying exactly the same thing.
I'm talking to Gary next week, by the way, so I'll ask him this question.
And look, and he's aware of this. I think there was, how do I put this? There was a big, and this is only from my understanding at Victoria University, so I can't really speak to RMIT because I don't teach in that program in SCU, and they're independent of the association, and they do that. But there was a big change in how the course was structured when they moved into the block mode. And they sort of identified that some of these things where we would go through history and principles and we would understand, how osteopathy worked, sort of got dissolved a little bit throughout because they were so busy in trying to move this old course into this block mode, and how that works. And so, 4 weeks a block, and you're targeting different areas of the body, and you're trying to teach them how to be an osteopath, but you're just doing it to the upper limb, and then you move to the thorax, and then you move to the lower limb, et cetera, et cetera. So I sort of identified it myself being in the student clinic, like when you would, you might say something like, oh, well, body's a unit, and they'd look at you and be like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, it's an osteopathic principle. And they're like, what? And I'm like, that blew my mind.
Yeah.
So we're certainly aware of it. We're aware of it, and we've been advocating and talking to the stakeholders, the universities, about this quite strongly. Yeah, in terms of that, there has been a level of discontent amongst the membership that there's been a dilution of osteopathic principles throughout the training programs. I don't know if it's on purpose or not. I certainly know that when I came out, there was people wishing that my graduate year wasn't that great either. And now we're doing the same thing. So history is repeating a little bit. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. Like I was sitting in that room in Melbourne, my last sort of thing I said of the night was actually sticking up for the new graduates a little bit. They think a bit differently, but they are learning.
It's not their fault, Matt. I'm not going to go with the new graduates.
But they are getting blamed, and I think that
they shouldn't be getting blamed. That's you're preaching the choir there. I agree 100% on that. And so the challenge there is being able to take the time as a business owner or as a practice principal or whatever it is to be able to spend some time to actually help. Well, yes, I agree with you, and that should happen. But at the very least, when you have like you just said it about being in the clinic, at the very least, when you have a conversation, you say, well, structure and function. What?
Yeah.
It's like you're talking Mandarin. It's and that's hard. That's really hard for a business owner because like they just want a baseline level of going, treat this, treat that, treat that. That's where they can help them. But you're asking the business owner to now teach them what should have been fundamentally taught to them at university level. And I think that's just somewhere something's gone wrong. Now, you mentioned before that you're not sure whether that's on purpose. I'd have to respectfully disagree with you. I think the way that accreditation is happening, we're moving towards a model that is very evidence-based and evidence-focused. Now, you can have a debate on this, and that's a whole other story. But once we recognise it as a profession that it's happening, we have to then make a decision. Are we going to go along with the ride, or is there going to be pushback? And if there is pushback, do we have a mechanism in place? Are we thinking about ideas that can take these students and then, help them overcome that? It could be internship. It could be an internship program. I know engineers and psychologists have a similar thing where they have to do an internship for a year before they actually get registered. We're doing advanced, we're doing advanced practice at the moment.
Yep.
And I guess there's something there for I'll be thinking of ideas in terms of how to, I guess, stop that hemorrhage in the future.
I think, there's obviously the engagement point through the different universities. With my university hat on, it's something that we see in the student clinic, that the clinicians and the senior, the supervising clinicians are very much pushing towards those osteopathic principles and explaining them to the students and trying to, they come to us, they're fresh face, they're baby face, they've got their foundational techniques, etc. and that, but it's trying to put that whole piece together. Yeah, so when they graduate and come out of the student clinic, they're not the complete package yet. They're never going to be when they graduate from university, but they're well on the way to becoming a complete package. And they're safe and they're competent practitioners. There's obviously different things within the university, and Gary can probably give you a far better answer from the university perspective.
Yeah, I think he will. My question to you is mainly around if we are recognising that this is happening, are we at least taking some, I guess, measures to have some programs in place? It sounds to me like the university's made their decision. This is the way we're going. We're doing block mode. We're teaching them, okay, osteopathy has been diluted. We don't really care. We're kind of moving on with it. As a professor, once we know this, we can fight them all we want, but I think we're a small fish trying to take on a big player. Are there any ideas out there, internships, having our own clinic, in each state that we can send students to learn about osteopathy and not have the pressure of this is the model this is the evidence-based model that we're going to run by. Are there any ideas there going along? Are we talking about this? Are we looking at ways that we can make up for that gap that the universities are kind of leaving behind?
Yeah, look, I would say much of this is being spoken about, Sammy.
Yeah.
And it is. Like, the internship models, the mentorship models, engaging with the universities and these sorts of things. But without having boots on the ground, like, we can talk to the university about this is what we're seeing, this is what our members are concerned about. Them actioning it is something else.
Yeah, definitely.
That being said, like, every time we have these conversations, they're very receptive. So, an AOC accredits the courses, and, there's osteopathic principles within that. So diluting into, I wouldn't think, like, having seen and been in a clinical situation the last month, which was very much, it was called IPE, which is interprofessional a clinical experience between the VU osteopathic students and the VU physio students. You could see the difference with the osteopathic students, and it's a point of pride for me. Like, they were still thinking as the person as a whole. Yeah, they were considering things that the physio students just did not consider, and even I think the physio students were quite shocked in that space because we do have such a broad knowledge base. And the students really shone through, and it was, first time in a long time, because you always compare yourself to yourself, and what's come beforehand. But seeing them with other practitioners in a VU setting, this was, it showed me that they're still there. Those underlying principles and those driving principles are still there. They are still there. They mightn't be as loud as they once were, but yeah, they're still there, and there is work to be done on that. I don't dispute that, Sammy. Yeah. I think that's true, mate.
All right, mate. I guess. In ending this, I want to just thank you for your time. I'm going to ask you to hang around with me a little bit and just have a discussion a bit more about your experience at the Western Bulldogs and what you can take away from that clinically. But for the public listeners, thank you, Matt Cooper, for spending some time answering questions. I know that some of the questions I'm kind of challenging you on and maybe giving you a hard time, but you've answered them really well, and I guess quite graciously giving up your time. So thanks again, mate.
Mate, appreciate you having me on, and challenge away. It's great.
Well, hang around with me, but for everybody else, have a good evening, and we'll see you on the next episode.